Thank you, everybody, for showing up today. This is episode number 11 of Believers and Non-Believers in Discussion. Today we're going to do something a little bit differently. We have an issue called the conflict issues. Now, this is related to different belief systems they conflict in different ways. Let's just take something very broad, such as, does religion and science conflict? Do they interact? And the answer is yes and no. They do conflict where they give contradictory positions. So in that sense, they do. And in other senses, you talk about mathematics, for example, they don't conflict. There's no problem. So what we're going to try to do today is to identify the biggest issues that society and we as believers and non-believers in trying to get along with each other have to put more work into, concentrate our efforts on. We'll probably hit some issues that are, let's just say, less important, because we're going to do some prioritizing here in terms of where we don't necessarily need to put our efforts as much, or that the bigger issues are of more value to put our time into. This is all very subjective, obviously, so we'll see what everybody's opinions are, and then we'll try to do a collection of opinions, and at the end of it, actually, we'll probably do it off tape just for the time sequence of it. I want to poll the entire audience and the front panel, and we'll come up with a nice top 10 list and then just put that out to the public for what it will be. And eventually, we'll use some of these topics as believers, non-believers, individual events to get into more detail on them, because really today we're just going to define the issues and then try to define positions on them, and not go into too much detail because there's just not enough time. There's a lot of stuff here. So the panel today, starting on my left, I guess, Havish Kota.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, my name is Havish Kota. I'm trained as a molecular biologist, but I work as a systems analyst in healthcare now, and I'm part of the Inland Empire Atheist and Agnostic Society. Thank you to the audience, first of all, for being here. One of the reasons I came to this discussion, and I'm now on the panel, is I strongly support discussion of broad issues at the local levels, not just at the national or state level or international level, for that matter. It's important that we take time out and think about these things. And thank you to the panel and to Phil for asking me to be here. So, in trying to come up with these 10 points of contention that we tend to have and are having currently, I found it pretty hard actually to come up with 10 solid questions that didn't meander all over the place. So I chose 6 that over the course of the past couple of years have been more and more important to me, and I think we might be able to reach some consensus on as far as the positions that these issues have. So do I go ahead?
No, let me just hold you there. We'll just kind of run it as an intro that for now to get started. Eric Ozels.
My name is Eric Ozels. Again, I'd like to echo appreciation for the audience members, our audiovisual team, the 2 groups I represent, Free Thinkers Around Redlands and the Inland Empire Atheists and Agnostics. Appreciate you guys coming.
I'm Phil Calderon. I do this, obviously, and my website is believeinreality.com, and I'm also a member of the Riverside area atheist groups. There's several of them. And to my right is David Torrey.
Yeah, my name is David Torrey. I'm involved in several different organizations, most prominently the 28ers, which is a group that seeks to get money out of politics, and we work with a lot of local, we ally with a lot of other local social justice organizations to achieve common goals, and we work extensively in local politics. Not going into tremendous detail because it's not exactly related to religion. It's just it will go into like a point that I'll get to about how we need to have this dialogue with believers and non-believers just to get things done in our community, because we have belief groups that are very involved in the community.
Then I want to thank you, David, for showing up this first time too, because I've been after you for a while. I first saw you on Facebook when this whole thing started, and I was telling you what we were going to do. So I'm glad you finally got to us. And Kelly Clemenson.
Last but not least,
Yes.
my name's Kelly Clemenson. I am, I guess you would call me the founder of the Areopagus Project, which is a mouthful. My
Pen.
wife used to call it Asparagus Project because
Pen,
she didn't
Kelly.
get that part. Pen, that thing away from me. Get that away from me. You're behind me, something. Anyway, I'm from a Christian perspective, and very interesting topics on the board here. I'm not much into politics, but I mean, I'm not to say that I don't get involved in it. I do. It's just I put that behind other more important things. But as David said, it's important to our communities because that's kind of where the laws break down and where some conflict comes in. So it's good to have that. What could be more conflicted than politics is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good enough introduction. And just feel sorry for me because I put on the spot here for this one. So in case I stumble, I'll have an excuse, right?
Yeah, these things are always kind of work out, not exactly the way they were planned, but I appreciate Kelly for coming in.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean we're not specifically gonna try to do politics here, though. Obviously, some of these issues are gonna cross into that realm. So we'll do the best we can to separate the two. Anyways, let's just start. I have a list too, but I'm actually not going to use it if you guys cover whatever. So it's pretty much your panel. So let me go back to Havish and Havish, sorry, and have you start with one of your.
Got a question. What do you define as a
Hold.
believer?
I'm sorry. Hold on. Go ahead. Go up to the microphone if you have an opening. We're going to do Q&A at the end, but
I just wanted a definition. What do you mean by believers and not believers?
is the mic okay over there, Barb?
Well,
Is it on?
It's working.
believers, is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear?
Yeah.
I don't think it is
What are the
on.
definitions
I don't think it is
of
either.
believers versus not believers, because I think everybody has different ideas of what you
I
mean.
think you turned it off.
Why, Dan? Yeah.
We'll get you.
Was that any better?
Now it's working.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Okay. Anyway, I just like to get some definitions so we know what we're talking about here, that's all.
Okay. There are basically two definitions that I'm working with on this panel. Most of the time we're talking about religion, believers in some sort of religious faith versus atheists. But the panel also broadens to belief in general and what I would consider unjustified belief, or underjustified belief is a better word. So sometimes we'll have people who believe in ghosts and conspiracy theories, and we had a Wiccan here once. So you get into more of a psychology on sometimes. I think in this particular one, we're probably going to be more of the religion versus atheism side, because in general, the ones that are not religious based do not really cause harm to others and in society. I throw out one exception to that probably is climate change. But generally, I think we're talking about religion versus atheism. Okay. So, Havish, go
Right,
ahead.
thank you, Phil. So I'll just start with my list of issues that I've.
Let's just do one at a time.
Okay,
So I know
sure.
we'll just kind of keep collecting it up.
Of course, absolutely. So, as one of the first things that comes to mind to me is, the issues surrounding recommendations, well-substantiated recommendations of scientists towards public good, or the public, for the public to follow, and the reasons why that are, fairly easily implemented, all the way to ones that have rather difficult applications and are something that we struggle with almost all the time. So just a few examples, for instance, vaccination, vaccination within various communities, and just the idea behind vaccination and its recommendations and how it's followed. All the way to, natural gas extractions from shale, for instance, and how they tend to have repercussions that are that within the local communities as well as outside, but you have the sides on the opposing side that are driven by the need to supply these fossil fuels, for instance, all the way to ones that are really hard to implement and that we still struggle with are anthropogenic influence on climate change. So what I mean is I don't intend to say that all climate change is caused by humans. Climate over broad periods of time has its own changes, it has cycles that it goes through, but in the past several decades we've seen an increase in the scale and the frequency of it, and how the consensus among scientists is not the one that's often found in the public discussion, for instance.
So right away, actually, you can see we're getting into a realm at times with it, which is not based on religion. And on policy, on science, I would think you have are you saying policy or education would be the higher priority?
I am more
Public
concerned
education.
about, I would say both. I would say education, policy is fairly well defined, I think, at various levels, not just at one level, but I think education is harder to get an outcome for, because it's, we can educate till the cows come home, but both the level of interest in the public towards these topics, and how far it affects them and in their communities, for instance, has an influence on how they respond to these education policies and recommendations.
So science recommendation for public. Do you want to say something on that,
Sure.
or what?
Sure.
What's your?
As far as from the, if we're going to go from atheist to Christian perspective, I don't find that is always in conflict. I believe that most Christians, that I know anyway, want to find out whether or not the climate is changing. I think where the disagreement would be is, have we had enough of the evidence or measurements, however you want to say it, have we had a long enough period of time to determine whether it's just cyclical or not? Because I think it's pretty evident from times not that long ago that the ice level or glacier level has been all the way down as far as Kansas City. So from that perspective, like I said, we live on this earth just like you guys do, and we do the same thing. We live on this earth, and we want it to be a good place. And I'm all for it. I love national parks. Just to let you know, I drive a Prius. I have solar panels on my house, so I'm not opposed to trying to make things better. But I believe what the objection from some is, that would include me, is have we measured it for long enough to determine whether it's a dynamic problem right now, or is it going to turn itself around in 30 or 50 years, where if we take radical solutions to it, is that something that is at this point warranted? I think that would be the question that I would bring up.
So if we're again trying to get this down to a specific
I was mainly on
priority.
climate change. I could, as far as vaccinations go, there's
Well, we're not going to get into
Yeah.
the detail of it. I want to keep this a little more meta.
sure. Okay.
So if we're talking policy versus education, I've just added research. I think you added, and also from what you said, interpretation of data.
Sure.
Would that be a proper phrase? So now we've got four things. Interpretation.
Can I just address vaccination quickly, because there's a belief that the Christian community is against vaccinations, and some of it, I think, as even science has determined, that maybe some of the times we've taken it to an extreme. But Kevin would be able to talk on that real well, my friend, because he came from a what do you call it, Kevin? An organization
Well, I mean,
that doesn't believe in vaccinations. They think that it's non-biblical to do such a thing. That there's prohibitions against it, which we don't find that.
Do you think it's important enough to basically add that to our list as a separate topic?
Well, you mentioned something about doing a cults thing. I think that would be a great thing.
No, I mean just vaccinations.
Yeah.
I mean, you think that would make the top 10 list in terms of whether or not people should have vaccinations, and that's enough of a debate in society that we should get?
I don't. If you're looking for conflict, I don't think there's much conflict there. I mean, you could probably get a Jehovah's Witnesses over here
Okay.
to talk to you about it, but as far as from a Christian's perspective, there's no conflict there. Luke that wrote one of the Gospels is a doctor, so
Okay.
he's
So I'm going to put
I don't think
down,
that's-
because
yeah.
I also, as we prioritize the top, I want to actually put down some of the ones that are sort of the bottom of the list that
Yeah.
we can spend less
Sure.
time on. So I'll
Yeah.
just put vaccinations down there. Okay. So, David, did you have anything to throw in? Because you're more of an activist.
Yeah, well, I know we have a diverse group of people here, and just listening to people talk, I'm getting a sense of like how varied the opinion is even in this room. So, I guess it's interesting. I did write down vaccinations on my list as well, and climate change. So I'm not going to go over that because we already talked about that. But I want to move on to the red hot button issue of, and I'm tying this to both abortion and contraceptives. I think it's related because as someone who's involved in activism and working with different organizations, I do find it interesting that women's healthcare is targeted in a way that men's healthcare is not. And some of it has to do with religious upbringing. I just want to give you some background. At the moment, I am an atheist, but I was raised very Christian, and I grew up that way. But the Christian church that I went to didn't have a position on these issues like abortion. And I grew up and I was always pro-choice. Like that was my position always. And when I met other Christians, and they would tell me, "Oh no, abortion is a sin. Abortion is terrible." And I'm like, "What? Why?" Like because I had never heard this before. I'm like, "Wait, what? It's a medical procedure. Like what?" The thing is like this is just such a stumbling block, and I think it has to do a lot with indoctrination. It has to do with how you're raised, because I was raised differently than presumably my friends were that were also raised Christian. They were just had it beat in their head from a very young age that abortion is killing a baby, and that's the only concern. It's just that. And with contraceptives, now we've seen laws that are restricting use of contraceptives and trying to get healthcare to exclude contraceptives and trying to get all sorts of hoops that you have to jump through to get contraceptives. And it's ridiculous because even besides the whole, it should be just enough that you use it for family planning, but there are legitimate medical conditions that require contraceptives. Like women take them for endometriosis, for all sorts of things. And so it really hurts people like that because there's this stumbling block over the issue of like, is it a life or is it not, that it's fine if someone wants to believe yet that we should prevent that, but it's like I think that there's nobody that should be for taking that decision away from the individual, because it's not my call. And I mean that's kind of really it's always motivated me, like that to me. I mean, I'm sure that's on other people's list, but that is a huge issue just because going into maybe I'm not going to get into this whole point now, but like one of the other things I wrote down was like how we get into bubbles that reinforce our own beliefs, and Facebook and Google and all these things make it really easy to just stay in these groups and just never break out and get everything that agrees with us, all the news that agrees with us, we reinforce all our worldviews. And I do it too. I'm guilty of it. I'm super guilty of it. And I literally have to force myself to expose myself to things that don't agree with me, and it's very difficult to do. It really is, because nobody wants to be uncomfortable.
So I just got 3 out of what you just said.
Sorry.
So no, that's great, but we'll come back to belief bubbles because I think that's important. Under women's healthcare, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the abortion issue would be probably the top of that.
Well, I think they're related. I think they're absolutely related. I view them both as part of healthcare. I view it as women's healthcare. The reason why I introduced it that way is because I view there's no real difference to me. Like the need for women to have a safe and legal abortion is the same to me as their need to have contraceptives or any other treatment that they need. It's just the other stuff is not politicized. There's nobody protesting outside of Planned Parenthood because they're giving out pap smears. I mean,
that's kind of the point I was trying to I want to make, is that I am not aware that anybody on the right or the religious side, it's mostly, I think, it's a little bit of both, conservatism and right, is against women's health care. They are against abortion kind of as a if you were to vote on one particular issue, abortion for a lot of people would be a single issue thing, and the women's health care issue gets impacted because of that vote. For example, taking away money from Planned Parenthood. So in terms of identifying the core issue, I think it would be abortion.
No, I would disagree.
Okay,
go ahead. You can get someone else.
And then we'll come back to you.
Okay, so David, you said you weren't qualified to make that determination. So who is qualified?
The individual, in my opinion.
Aren't you an individual?
Sure.
Okay.
No, but I'm not in control of the body, and I guess if you're really interested in exploring the philosophical exploration of this topic, I mean, there's a great paper that's like really old now. Judith Jarvis Thompson, 1971, wrote literally a philosophical in defense of abortion, I believe it's called, and it literally just. I think the conversation keeps being made about, is it a life or is it not a life? And this paper correctly just says, okay, it's a life. So what? And I know that sounds harsh, but if you look at every other thing that we do, such as someone who has a child and the child has a weak kidney, and we don't compel someone by law for a father to give up their kidney to their dying child. And if we don't do that, then it really makes no logical sense that we should force a woman to bear a pregnancy against her will. And that's I'm very, obviously, this is one of the things that got me involved in politics, is just having these discussions, and I don't mean to ramble, I'm sorry.
Okay, so you mentioned somebody that has a failing kidney, as opposed to, and trying to alleviate that problem, however you might do that. And you talked about compelling someone to give up their kidney. I don't really see how those two correlate. You've got to.
Oh.
I mean, and another question I had: where do you make the cutoff? Are you up to the point where the birth canal head comes out, you stick a rod through it?
I think I'm fine with the way it's currently defined by the Roe v. Wade ruling, where it allows states to determine what they want to do in the third trimester.
Can I add something that I think will be helpful to this conversation here? And this is my first chance. I didn't want to interrupt, so we let out a lot of line, and I've got some ordinance I want to drop on some things that we went over earlier. So, real quick, a question came up about a correlation between climate change. Climate change made all of our lists, by the way, of a conflict subject. A correlation between religious believers, and I'm talking about a stereotype, not necessarily religious believers that you guys say you're on board with climate change, man-made climate change, no issue whatsoever. But there is a painting with a very broad brush, a general science denial or rejection of scientific consensus from religious believers. If you're a religious believer and you don't reject scientific consensus, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking about your friends, the guys that are next to you, okay, that are doing that are voting along those lines. So there actually is a little bit of a connection there. It goes along with a couple other issues as well. So that was the first thing I want to say on climate change. Abortion made my list as well. It's a little bit of a cultural meme. We talk about abortion. It's actually a whole lot more. There's several ways to break it down, but I break it down 3 different ways. The first issue is bodily autonomy, which I think is what you were talking about earlier, and we're getting confused because Kelly wanted to talk about the second issue, which is the sliding scale element of that. And the third issue is access to safe abortions. Abortions are going to happen, whether they're legalized or not. The question is whether or not a woman is going to be able to damage herself with a coat hanger. Ugh, there's a shriver for you. Or she's going to have to drive across the border of Mexico. They're going to happen no matter what. I mean, there are stories about girls who've thrown themselves off of buildings to abort their own fetuses. They're going to happen regardless, whether they're legal or not. And if you understand the argument behind, I'll pick a stereotypical right-wing argument, access to guns. If you criminalize guns, the guns are still going to exist. They're still going to be out there. If you criminalize abortions, they're still going to happen. They're just not going to be medically safe. So that was the third issue. And what you guys were getting confused between was bodily autonomy and the sliding scale argument. First, I'll cover the sliding scale. It's the question of, hold on real quick, if I can just get through this real quick, if you don't mind. The sliding scale is, when does a romantic liaison turn into a fertilized egg, turn into a blastocyst, turn into a zygote, turn into an embryo, fetus, child, baby, person, so forth, blah, blah, blah. That's the sliding scale argument. We can have that argument all day long. But that's a little bit of a medical issue, which I think you were saying, which I personally am not qualified to talk about. That's why I focus so much attention at ordinance on bodily autonomy. I'll give a real quick analogy. If you and I were in a car accident and it was completely your fault, Even if you did it on purpose and for some freak incidents, the EMT showed up and they have to hook up my body to yours, and your body is keeping me alive, we cannot have a rule that says you must keep me alive with your body. The person whose body is providing life gets autonomy. They get to decide. And yes, babies in the womb, call them babies, call them children, whatever rhetoric you want to use, the baby in the womb has its own bodily autonomy as well. This is why when a murder happens to a pregnant girl, you charge them with 2 murders, right? Because it's not just one person, it's 2. The baby has its own bodily autonomy. However, the person providing the baby, child, whatever's life, the person providing life, their autonomy trumps the baby's autonomy, only in that circumstance only. So there's the bodily autonomy argument, there's the sliding scale argument, and then there's the access to safe abortions argument. Sorry to monopolize the conversation.
I just want to leave it at that, because...
Can we have one question before we go?
No.
No?
Because this is obviously an issue
It's a
for
hot
the
button
list,
topic. That's
and we need to do a program on it. So at this point, you guys have made a lot of points, and let that be sort of a taste of what's to come. So this is definitely
We
on
should
the
have
list.
an entire episode on that.
I'm game if you're looking for somebody.
Yeah, apparently, yeah. Back to eliminate a couple things here. Contraception, is that less of an issue that we shouldn't make our top 10?
Well, as far as contraception, the Protestants have no problem.
Contraception would be in terms of whether or not people should be imposed on to have contraceptions for employers to make a decision based on their employees, that sort of thing.
Well, because they do have the rights. I mean, an organization that doesn't...
should we make this a top issue to deal with?
I made a list, and one of my main subjects I want to talk about was misogyny. I made contraception a subset of my issue of misogyny.
Okay, so we'll leave it on the table.
And misogyny is a huge issue that I'd like to spend 10 minutes talking to you guys about if I can.
We'll leave that on the table for now, and then come back to it when we're trying to trim a little bit. And women's health care, also, what does everybody think about having that as a major issue, as opposed to, if once you separate abortion out, and well, we're not going to separate contraception out yet, but
the idea that Christians are against women's health care is just it's nonsense. We're not, and the fact that we oppose abortion has nothing to do with the woman's health. Now, there's that little percentage that everybody wants to talk about when a woman's life is in danger. I don't think there's anybody that would restrict her choice to do that, but that's less than 1% of the abortions that are performed. So we're not talking about that.
Okay.
And
you okay on this side if we put women's health care?
Women's health care is completely separate.
I would absolutely be okay, but I would be completely remiss if we thought that 4 XY chromosomes sitting up here talking about women's health care was in any way apropos.
You can make a conscious. You can still make a conscious evaluation.
Which is a good point. Yeah, and we can.
You can still make a conscious evaluation of whether somebody.
So panel on women's health care with 3 women.
Where's the women up on?
You need 6 women also up there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I tried. Trust me, I tried.
I don't disagree with you.
Would you like to volunteer for a future panel? Because I'd love to have you out there.
I would, because I don't think you guys are well informed about women's health.
Perfect.
I agree with you.
Perfect. So we will get together after this panel, and we will exchange emails, and we will set that up. I would love to do that.
I'm having so much fun here.
Okay, so we have abortion. We're going to leave that. I'm going to go back to Havish for a second. Just to knock off the shale one, if it's okay, you guys let me know if this is agreeable to you.
Once again,
because
I'm not sure if that we can push it down to a lower priority once we see what the other issues on the table are.
The reason I'm suggesting to do this is because for a believers non-believers panel, it seems to be an issue of economics versus environmentalism, which is not a belief issue as much as a political issue.
Within that context, I would agree, but it's not so much the that specific economic context in which I was discussing that. It's more of how should we determine what if anything does spirituality and religion have to do or to say about issues where an individual's health or a community's health is impacted by the societal choices at large, in which I would include, the interests of corporations. And we also ultimately benefit from those as well. It's not that we are excluded from that, but at what cost? So human, I suppose it is a bit too specific to tie into, the suffering of a few individuals over the many, and what rights do those individuals have to oppose this practice. But if that's kind of a really specific example, then I'm fine with it. I just brought that up
as long as, because I just don't, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see it as a belief issue.
Right. I came in.
But you may disagree. So
again, there is a correlation, and I'm stereotyping, between science denial, between somebody who says Yeshua of Nazareth is coming back any minute. This planet is ours. We have dominion over it. We can do whatever we want to it. There is a correlation. If you guys don't feel that way, I'm not talking to or about you. I'm speaking in broad generalities here. If this earth is only going to last a few minutes because Jesus is coming back, we can do whatever we wanted to, and we can treat animals any way we want, because we have dominion over them. So there is a correlation between a lot of these subjects and belief versus non-belief.
Right, and in
you don't need to say you're right when you're talking to me. It's automatically implied.
Well, I would hope that while that would please me to no end, Aaron, I actually relish the idea that we within a community have things that we disagree about. Because we're never going to run out of things to discuss. But we can reach consensus about something without necessarily agreeing on its implications and how it actually applies to our day-to-day life. But anyways, leaving that point aside for a minute, I formulated my issues not necessarily on the polarization between religion versus unbelief or non-belief. I was trying to think in terms of belief in a certain stance, as opposed to the demonstration or evidence against that, for instance. I'm not saying that one side or one belief is entirely without evidence. I'm just saying, where or how do we arrive at these issues, and to what extent does that bleed into religion versus non-belief?
I'd like to address something what Eric said there. As far as the idea that Christians are hanging around looking up at the sky, Jesus didn't tell us to do that. At the start of the book of Acts, Jesus was taken into heaven, and the apostles were standing on, as you're somewhat implying, looking up in the heavens thinking, what do we do next? No, he said, be about your business. So there's no reason to think that just because we're Christian doesn't mean that we can't take care of the environment, that we don't care whether or not you're tearing up the ground in one particular community to mine for minerals. We do care. And just because there happens to be the idea that we're going to have a redemption come along, that doesn't mean we just forget about the earth. That's not us. And I don't think it's anybody that is realistically inclined. I mean, there's people that have strange ideas on whatever side you want to pick. So referencing the ones in Christianity, I'm not saying there isn't. There probably is. But there's also plenty of them on the atheist side as well that have ideas that may not be good for everybody. So I just wanted to reference that because it came across that these Christians are just waiting for Jesus to come back, and we care nothing about anybody or anything else.
I tried to hedge that as best I could by saying I wasn't talking about you specifically. It sounds
like
you've got a hermeneutical issue between Baptists and Lutherans and so forth.
Right.
You said Jesus said, well, I would first need to know that Jesus existed in the first place, whether he could have actually said it.
I think that's pretty clear. But anyway.
There are plenty of people, Christians, who do think that he'll be back within one generation. I'm not going to argue interpretation scripturally real quick.
Okay.
I want to backtrack real quick.
Let me just address that for just a second, just a quick.
If I can go, because he came before you did.
Can I come back to that?
Please. You were talking about agreement and disagreement among society. I couldn't agree more how well that fits in. I think disagreement's great because it helps us sharpen our tools and improve. It's like sparring. You don't get better by talking to yourself only. You get better by challenging your ideas with other people. However, when we're talking about disagreements between matters of opinion, I prefer chocolate versus vanilla. That's a preference. We're talking about disagreements relative to fact. Someone is right and someone is wrong. And at the end of the day, credible evidence has to win out that conversation. If you follow me?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would agree with that as well in terms of the difference between preference, and opinion on matters that impact our day-to-day lives, and more than just one individual or group. And in fact, I think that's why we are here, not to pronounce these are the issues that are important in society, but we are reaching a consensus amongst ourselves as to what we can decide for this group, for this panel that we have and subsequent panels on what issues we might address in the future. I don't see this particular session as a way to address all these problems and to present facts on one side versus facts on the other side, or belief on one side versus belief on the other side. We just don't have the time to do that.
Right.
Cool. Kelly,
Right.
if you can you make it quick and
Quick, yes,
give
real
Phil his
quick.
panel back.
As far as the denominations go, you may get people like the guy down in Florida that said it was going to happen on a certain day. In the Bible, it says directly, you are not going to know the day. So, again, it's just I wanted to address that there may be congregations that have this or that idea as far as what's going to happen in the future, but as a believer and what I would describe myself hopefully as a Berean, I go to the Bible to find out. If somebody says something's going to happen on a certain day, I go to the Bible and I say, well, is that possible? And the one who wrote the Bible, which I believe is Jesus Christ, he says, no, you're not going to do that. So if somebody says on a certain day that the rapture is going to happen, I'd put my house on the fact that it's not going to happen on that day.
And let me just say the last.
That's what I wanted to address, is that you can hear people that have extreme ideas on whichever side you want to go on, but if you go by what their, worldview is, then you can pick out what is actually the common knowledge amongst the group.
I will just finish this issue by saying that there is a stewardship issue that
Sure.
Certainly the Pope has been positive on, and
We have a better representation than that, but yeah, okay.
well, I'm just
I agree with you.
grabbing a
I'm
couple
just
of-
saying
the
that,
Pope represents a lot of population, so.
of course, I wouldn't agree
And
with
certainly
him
the
on a lot
Dalai
of stuff,
Lama is
but-
another one who's
Sure.
been on stewardship
Yeah.
of the planet. And to my knowledge, those who are, is it Dominionists?
Dominionists. Ted Cruz.
Are a subset. It would seem a minority subset. So it's not the biggest.
Sure. And again, my point would be that
So-
God told us to take care of the earth because that's our home.
Yeah. So I'm hoping
And
that more
going
and
by
more and
what
more
he says,
people
that's what he's
will
doing.
go along that
I'm glad
route.
you interpret the text that way.
So David, I want to go back to you
Sure.
for belief bubbles. So
Yeah.
let's get off of that subject for now and move on to another one. So belief bubbles seems to be a big thing. Can you give us a little more restart on that?
Sure. And I'm really glad you brought that up because that was the next thing I wanted to talk about. So, I did talk about how we not only have, like I mentioned, how Facebook and Google, they designed their search engines giving us what we want to see. That's how they make money. And now, while that may make sense from an advertising perspective, obviously, companies want to sell products that are relevant to us. And that makes sense. It unfortunately has a lot of negativity when we get into isolated media bubbles. Like all the friends who are like-minded, they'll post from the same news sites that reinforce what we already believe. And I feel bad I get a lot of my news from Facebook these days, and I think that's a bad thing because I'm getting a hyper-partisan bubble. And I'm totally aware of it, that this is a totally biased thing. And I try to pull myself out of it, even though it's pulling me back in. And I think, and the reason why I'm being critical is because I'm not saying I'm better than anyone else. I think everybody does this. Naturally, a lot of us are just naturally tribalistic. And it's a survival trait. It's something how we survived in the wild. Like we protect our own, and we have to bond with the like-minded people. So, but at the same time, there's a downside when you're not exposed to information that may be true that you're just not seeing, and you're believing things that are not true. And I actually have. To be honest, I'm just bringing back, I have a lot of criticism of the atheist community as an atheist. I have criticism of the atheist community for a lot of things where I feel, this is kind of dovetailing into these two things of media isolationism, and I also wrote down religious ignorance in the local community, and this is something I touched on.
Well, before you jump there, I want to stay on belief bubbles for now, and get some other input from the rest of the panel. Anybody have anything they want to add to that?
Yeah, certainly we can see that happening all the time, and it's nothing new. I think we're seeing a more pronounced version of that nowadays because of the increased media coverage. So I don't think we are necessarily more polarized than we've ever been. It seems that way, certainly within the past few generations, maybe. But this idea that we're going towards an unbridgeable divide is is not something that I would support. But having said that, any amount of doubling down, and remaining within those bubbles is certainly harmful in the long run. And I would agree with David in that, and as do, I'm assuming, many of you. And how do we correct for that? How do we correct for things that impact us without us realizing that? One example, just as something that I've seen, is to actively engage with the other side despite having some sort of hesitancy behind that. And it's not simply going up and talking to somebody who has a different viewpoint from you, but trying to get into their perspective and understanding, why is this important for you? Just as an example, I frequently read the New York Times as a primary source of news, but I've been picking up the Journal, which is not exactly the opposite of the New York Times, as far as its views are concerned, but there are certainly differing views within the op-ed pieces of the Wall Street Journal as opposed to the New York Times. And I find myself disagreeing with some of the Journal's op-eds, as do maybe not as many of the New York Times op-eds, but a few of them. And that's just one way that I found that I can at least participate in discussion on a broader level, so maybe.
So I'm getting the sense that you don't think it's perhaps as significant.
Right. Yeah.
It hasn't changed that much in the
right.
last
It is
generation?
significant. I'm not trying to downplay its significance, but I'm saying rather than addressing belief bubbles simply by themselves, it's a phenomenon that will happen regardless. As David mentioned, we're not going to get rid of our tribalism overnight. It's these things happen without groups and communities realizing it. But the question is, once we've realized that, do we actively counteract that? Do we say, we as a community are reinforcing our distinctness, or are we as a community trying to find things that connect us to other communities? And actively trying to change our worldview to be a little bit more in line with other communities. That's, I think, where we could have a lot of discussion, is what should we do about having differences of opinion as entrenched as they are in the bubbles.
So I would think that one of the difficulties, or maybe the greatest difficulty, would be people inducing people, I guess is an okay word. I'm sorry, Reb, you've got an electric thing that's not plugged in there. Is that okay? So sorry, we had to plug in a battery there. So we were on belief bubbles. So I was going to say that the challenge really is to get, at least I think, is to get people interested in engaging the other side. Because once you're in a belief bubble, you tend not to want to go out. So, but we'll talk about that. I think it's one of the most important issues. So, anybody else have anything else before we move on to another one?
Yeah, does that I'm sort of familiar with the term, but David, give me an idea of what you mean by
Confirmation bubble is usually how it's used.
Yeah.
Just that your thinking pattern is one, and you may need to look at another.
Well, I
in general?
It's in general. It's not limited to religion. That's why it was very important to make it about a general tribalism that all people have.
Sure.
And I mean, I know you cut me off, but I do think this is related with the just really briefly. The fact that not a lot of us are aware of the religious communities in our own neighborhood. And this is something, as someone, I was talking to him about my experience of visiting a local mosque. I had never been to a mosque before. And a lot of us have never been to a religious community that is not our own. And I think that's a really good experience. I think I would like to encourage people to do that. Even if you don't believe in something, to just go to a Buddhist temple, go to a synagogue, go to as many as you feel comfortable going to, because I learned things that I had assumptions about these people that were totally wrong. And the only way you learn about religion, I believe, is by interacting with the people who follow it. It's very easy, and this is where I critique a lot of atheists. We get buried in the religious books and we start quoting horrible verses out of the Quran or horrible verses out of the Bible, and we don't not enough of us are talking to religious people and actually interacting and say, what do you believe? Like, what do you actually believe? Because it doesn't matter what is written in this book if you don't believe it. And so I think that, like, and they do this, I mean, it seems so obvious because it's like if you take go to a community college and take a, like, comparative religions class at RCC, they will basically tell you to do this. Just go to a mosque, go to a synagogue, go this and observe and just sit there and see how they worship and talk to people. And it's a very enriching experience. I just want to add this, and I mean this is an example of something that breaks us outside of our bubble, is that exposing us to people who don't like, because I don't agree with Muslims on their religion, but I can respect that they welcomed me there. They gave me really good food, and they it's fun. It's a lot of fun to talk and even actually I found some value in what they're doing, even though I didn't understand it. Like listening to their prayers, the way they pray. I mean, it's interesting, and the same goes with everything. Like if you're not, I mean, I guess a lot of us are familiar with Christianity because that's the most dominant religion in the United States. It's just that the other ones don't get as much knowledge. So, but yeah, I'll move on. Thanks.
So let's go on to another one.
Go ahead.
Kelly,
Yes.
give us one for the list.
Okay. Let's see. I was looking at one here that was rather interesting. Okay, which one? Let me just give me a minute here. I'm sorry. So anti-discrimination from a Christian perspective. What was your thought pattern on that, Phil? Where were you going with that?
Well, that list was in case
Yeah.
somebody didn't show up.
In case
so I would
right,
actually rather to have your input rather than going on my interpretation on what I think your input would be. So don't take it quite so literally.
Okay, so I assume you can find discrimination no matter where you go, but
I mean, what is
in that vein, there's discrimination in many other places for people who call themselves Christians. Right now in the Middle East, in most places, it's pretty dangerous to be a Christian. Even in Israel, there are times if you come to Israel to talk to Jews about the Messiah, Christ, they may or may not let you stay. So even in a place like Israel, that is the kind of the birthplace of Christianity, so to speak, there's governments intervening in that liberty, and I think to a certain extent, our government is going to be intervening in that liberty in short order. The Canadian government already has. There are certain portions of the Bible that can't be read as considered to be hate speech. So that part of it, I see that as a encroachment onto liberty. I mean, the country was founded on freedom of speech, whether it be if you don't believe in God at all, whether you believe in one that is variant from the Christian faith, or if you believe in the one that is. I think the country was founded on the fact by the people that came here that you could do that, because they came from a place, supposedly Christian Europe, whereas if you have a different idea about who Christ was than what the government had, then you were going to be persecuted to the point of many of them getting burned for simply translating the Bible from Latin to English. John Wesley was burned, at least I think it was Wesley, was burned at the stake for doing that. So I think that discrimination thing is something that is coming. And maybe you guys as atheists have had that same issue come up maybe in European societies, that someone that didn't believe in God at all, and there's places that the atheist community would be in as much trouble as a Christian community is, and that kind of discrimination.
Blasphemy is currently punishable by death in 7 countries in the world.
Yeah, and I would be in the same boat as you, Eric. We'd float down that same river. So that's an interesting topic, and how does that? Do
you think
how does that get resolved?
Do you think the greater issue would be discrimination of just Christians in America, or just discrimination of religion? Because religious freedom is kind of another angle to go.
Well, the bottom line is the problem is man. Man has decided that we're going to dictate how people are going to live their lives, and if somebody's variant from the type of idea of how you're going to live your life, as opposed to mine, then you may be thrown in jail, flown down the river.
So it would
Chopped
be
your head off,
discrimination
whatever the case may be,
of,
burned at the stake.
of the religious
Sure, and
by
I-
society would be the...
I personally think that that's a problem for man. Because man, and I'm talking about not the
Okay.
gender, but the race, I believe that is a problem of man.
So
and
discrimination of the religious by the
Yeah.
non-religious?
And even the religious of the religious, because a lot of that goes on too.
True.
The propensity of man to decide that we're going to dictate how somebody's going to live their life.
Okay. This is a very tough one, and I think it's important. I agree with you. Any comments from over here?
Yeah, so one thing is, you note that blasphemy, of course, is and I would extend that to not just a pronouncement of non-belief in a society that is religious, but also a support for a belief that is against the majority or even the state religion, for instance. So, first off, I'd like to ask a follow-up question with that. What responsibility does one sovereign country have for another to either support, dictate, or influence their laws as they regard to discrimination based on belief? One thing.
Sure.
And because it's certainly a concern. When I hear about any people being the victims of violence, especially, or systematic brutalization or penalization based on their beliefs, that does cause an emotional response. But at the same time, what is my responsibility towards that? And it's not always a clear-cut thing. It's not simply me saying, okay, I'm going to get on a plane and start protesting, and wherever this is occurring, or am I going to raise funds towards this issue and monetarily influence one way or another? And then the other thing I would say is, you tend to see that discrimination of religious groups by the majority religion, wherever you see it, tends to come from other religious groups. It's not something that occurs purely based on secular law.
Oh, I would disagree with you on that, Harish, I'm sorry. I would disagree with you on that completely. I believe the biggest discrimination, and as far as the that darn thing down, so I don't click it. As far as the actual ultimate penalty, there's been more of that practiced by the secular humanist regimes than there has been from Islam, Christianity, whichever one you want to mention, in the form of Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot. They persecuted people for being religious. But I'm not saying that that's, well,
They expect a totalitarian, dominionist control.
Sure, and I'm not saying that that's...
And they expect it to be worshipped. I mean, the most religious country in the world is North Korea. You got the picture of your leader in everybody's house. He expects complete capitulation at all times.
Right, but you frame that as religious. North Korean is anti-religious.
No, they're anti-theist because they don't want competition from
so they're
theism.
anti-theist. That's fine, but they put people like
they're
Christians.
Still very religious.
I think
they expect to be worshipped.
The guy that just got out of North Korea and died, he was a Christian.
Yeah,
and he got put in jail for preaching the gospel.
They persecute Christians. They're anti-theists.
And my point is this: I'm not trying to associate the atheist movement with people that are in that any more than I want you guys to associate Christianity with people that violate its principles, such as the Pope, such as the Spanish Inquisition.
It's a false comparison, though.
No, not at all.
No, it absolutely is, because when you talk about atheism, you don't want me to associate atheism with North Korea, if atheism is even a coherent concept. Atheism doesn't inform ideas. It doesn't inform positions. It doesn't inform actions. Christianity does. There are direct passages you can read out of these books, that inform you and inspire action. There is no action from not believing in a theistic God. You simply act upon your convictions. And if you want to be worshipped by the population, just like Hoxha in Albania and all these other bad guys you want to name, they outlaw religion because they don't want competition for them being worshipped.
But the same result is the end result. The end result is that man decides to take things into his hands. And you say that the atheistic regimes didn't have a doctrine that they wanted to enforce. They certainly did.
Kelly, they also didn't figure skate.
Don't get me wrong. I think
they weren't doing that, but that didn't inform their actions either, right?
But I mentioned in Europe, they had the same thing. And I'm not trying to say that they didn't. I'm just saying that it's man is at the root of the cause. Because man in Europe decided we're going to have the Latin Bible, and that's all we're going to have. And if you decide to translate it, then we're going to come after you, and we're probably going to kill you. That's man again. A man taking. Let me just finish.
Go ahead.
Man taking morals into his own hands, and whenever he does that, there's somebody's going to suffer. That's my point, is that taking that morals into your hands because of your point of view,
That's a 30-minute
and you want it to
conversation
get.
we need to have.
So David,
just really quick. I mean, obviously, I do know it's like we're thinking like on the whole world stage. Obviously, nobody wants dictatorships where people are stripped of their civil liberties,
Except for
including
dictators.
the freedom to worship, which I don't think there's anyone on this panel who believes that anyone should be denied the right of their own conscience. And so I don't tend to talk about like international issues because like there's really nothing I can do about North Korea. I mean, it's terrible. I can wag my finger at it and say, oh, this is terrible, a horrible thing. But like, there's not much I can do. I can work in my local community. I can talk to people I know in this, community. And you don't need to go that far to see religious persecution. I think what happened very recently, and this is not something that's sanctioned by any religion, like explicitly, but I think that there was that I think Najee, gosh, I wish her name. She was like a 17-year-old Muslim girl who was murdered, like in Virginia, I believe. Nazra, that's her name, Nazra. But she was murdered, and what she was doing, she was leaving her mosque or going to her mosque, and she was trying to practice her religion. And they say it's a road rage incident, that she was targeted, that the guy just got really angry at her because she was, I guess, a bad driver or whatever. I mean, but I don't believe that, and I don't think I think that there is a case to be made that they're targeting her because she was wearing hijab. And it's not just there are people who are targeted for being Christians, they're targeted for being Jewish, or like it does happen. I mean, it does happen, like especially when you're getting into the different denominations of Christianity. There's I've seen people harassed for being like Mormons, or what I'm saying, it happens, and this kind of religion, like if we don't respect people's right to believe and live and not live in fear. I mean, that's really my concern, is like, cause just that's something that's like hits way closer to home.
One thing just to clarify on that, David, I don't think we should conflate two types of violence or brutalization into one. We're not discussing an individual or a group that has no governmental affiliation, acting against another individual or group. They are hate crimes, no doubt about it. And we should do everything that is legally possible to correct that. And of course, societally condemn that. But I'm not talking specifically about that. That's not the same phenomenon as state-sponsored, one that has no legal redress, right? Where if a apostate in a certain country publicly announces that they are no longer religious, or maybe they are not of that religion particularly, that they get publicly executed or in some other way ostracized from the society. I don't think those are two of the same issues. They're certainly motivated by similar motivations, I guess, but their application is quite different, and the end result is much more, I think, has much far-reaching consequences when it's state-sponsored or it's condoned by the state.
If I can redirect real quick, you talked about earlier about how you can't have much of an influence over North Korea, and I do agree, but I will plead with you that an injustice against anyone is an injustice against all of us at once. And yeah, you can't have much influence over what goes on over there, but all of us are susceptible. And if you're a humanist, and if you care that if your next door neighbor is beating his kids and you call the police, the world is getting smaller every single day by the internet, the information superhighway, and airplanes are getting faster and faster. The world is getting smaller. This is our neighborhood. North Korea is our next door neighbor, and they are holding them hostage, they are abusing them, they're manipulating and cajoling and coercing them. What happens to them is happening to all of us as humanity. Sure. So I'm not going to just throw my hands up and say, well, I'm only going to focus on my local area, which is admirable to focus on your local area, but realize the local area is becoming less and less your zip code as it is the globe and possibly beyond someday.
Less and less local. Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, just I'll wrap this up quickly because I know you want to move on. But I mean, I don't think it's of no importance. I obviously
I
care.
wasn't accusing you.
No,
Yeah.
I understand that. And to go off what you were saying, like, it's not that I don't care, like I do. It's just, you know, I'm always thinking like policy, like what do we do? And the thing is that like when it comes to things like North Korea, like, I mean, the only thing that can be done to change that thing is like some kind of military incursion, which don't think is very wise. And I mean, I really, honestly, I mean, there's no way to get in there. Like if you know, they block off. They don't even have real internet. They don't even have a real phone. It's not connected to the largest. They're completely shut off from the outside world, and everything in there is controlled. So, yeah, there are people who are trying. I mean, I think it's interesting that there's some people who like are proposing, oh, maybe we should broadcast Wi-Fi over their country here. Like, I mean, it's interesting, but that could also backfire. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off.
At this point, we're kind of up to a.
Go ahead. Let's
almost up to a whatever actually works.
Whatever works.
We'll consider. Eric, I'm gonna go back to you for adding something new to the list.
I had so many topics and sub-issues I wanted to address. I'll pick a big one. How about my gripe against the theocracy or the attempted theocracy of America specifically is a privileged status that religious non-believers see religious organizations, groups, and churches having. And my issue was privileged status, and my sub-issues were a little bit of a long list, so just bear with me. The 501c3, the application process is hyper simplified. If you want to be a nonprofit, it's like a 20-page application, and if you're a church, it's like a 2-page application. And there's all kinds of fees are waived. It's a lot of privilege there. Lack of transparency for donors. If a donor gives a church on a corner $10 million, he doesn't have to have any sort of culpability, any sort of accountability for where that money goes. He just can he basically can put all of it in his back pocket and say, oh, I donated to your favorite politician. That's a problem. That's a gripe I have with the privileged status of religion in this country. Untaxed political speech. Churches advocating for political campaigns from the pulpit, on the sly, on the down low. You're never going to vote for a woman who's pro-choice, right? They're not telling you who to vote for, but they're pretty much all but telling you who to vote for, right? That's an issue that I've got. Parsonage. I was hoping we'd have a member of the clergy here that could explain that. That is the privileged status of housing being non-taxed by clergy members. It's called parsonage. Protection from criticism. If a father, you talked about killings earlier, there's honor killings. I can't hold you guys accountable for Islamic honor killings, but you know, a father kills his daughter for wearing makeup, and everybody just goes, oh, well, it's their religion. That's bad. It's too bad she died. But there's a privileged status. If anybody else killed a girl for wearing makeup, it'd be national news. But if it's a father killing his daughter, people just go, oh, no big deal. That's an issue I take with the privileged status of religion. I told you my list was long. Child care facility exemptions. If you have to have a child care facility in this country, you have to have a certain number of employees and personnel per child that you watch. First aid kit, fire exits, fire hydrant, fire extinguishers, all kinds of stuff like that. If you're a church and you say, "Oh, we're a religious facility," all of that stuff goes away overnight. There's a story of a woman, I memorized her name, I just forgot it, who lost her child care licenses. And a week later, she got it back because she said, oh, we're a religious organization. All of a sudden, she had the exact same kids back in the exact same house in the exact same dangerous conditions, simply because she said, oh, we're a religion. This is an issue that I take. We'll keep going here. The Hobby Lobby imposing its religious beliefs on its employees. Arc Park, places like that being able to discriminate. This is legalized discrimination. They're saying we're not going to hire anybody who's not a young earth creationist. That's an issue.
Where was that at?
Let me hold.
I get two more.
Let me hold you there because I want to get to religious freedom as a separate issue.
Sure. So, well, that's a privileged status is the way I look at it.
I'm just curious.
And the Religious Freedom Restoration. Two more. The Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, which are not freedom in any way, shape, or form, and money on the motto, the imposition of religion on our money and our motto, "In God We Trust," used to be a pluribus unum. These are issues I take.
I just curious. You said something about Young Earth. There was a
the Arc Park, Kenham in Williamsburg, Kentucky.
Yeah.
He makes you sign a statement of faith saying you are a young Earth creationist and you're not going to oppose that view or teach it or disagree with that view in any way, shape, or form.
I have to check on that.
Yeah, that is a privileged religious status that I couldn't say I'm going to hold a business and I'm only going to hire secular humanists. I couldn't do that. Yet he gets away with it, and that's a privileged status that
I haven't
It
checked into
perturbs
that.
me.
I wanted to hear that from you so I could check into it. I hadn't heard that.
Any comments before I throw out a couple questions?
Sure. You brought up a lot of stuff here, Eric, that I'm gonna have to check on. I hadn't got much into the political side of it, like I said. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we both run a booth at Market Night, right?
Yeah.
Don't you guys get the non-profit?
Yes.
Okay. So that part, I mean, there's
There's a difference between 501c3s and
Yeah.
yeah,
there's
but
a
you get the
difference.
non-profit thing too.
Sure, yeah, but it's we are nonprofit and we're not allowed to be advocating for political speech, and religions can do that on their own.
Religious
Honestly.
nonprofits have a separate
There's an
category.
entire
and
separate
and
kind of product.
additional,
Well, as far as tax
additional
benefits, yeah, it could be.
privileges. And we can go over that on a topic.
Again, politics has lots of stuff going on with it. There's been times when one particular group of influence decides that they're going to give benefits to a certain subdivision, and that goes on, and it certainly has with churches. I mean, obviously, they don't have to pay property taxes with their church, so that happens. But
Yeah,
there's
so, I
been
mean,
there's
when
been
you
privilege
call-
status of
When you
other
call
things.
the, when
Well,
you call the fire department and you say, hey, put the fire at my house, all the houses around the church are paying taxes. They're paying for the fire department. Yet the same trucks put out the church. They're not
Sure.
paying for the benefit. I'm not saying don't put the fire out. I'm saying you're getting a benefit that you're not paying for.
yeah, okay, could have a point there. We agreed
I
on
do have a
something,
point
Eric.
there.
I think we should
agreed on
mark
a
this
lot.
down.
We're allies. We're both after good information here, Kelly. We just disagree.
We
on
are,
the-
yes. We just disagree on the application of it, that's for sure.
And
But that's okay, we can disagree, right? Without.
Well, when you disagree on opinion, yes. On fact, somebody's factually wrong.
Okay.
But I still love you, buddy.
Thank you.
Any
Oh,
other
you too, my brother.
points before I
No,
throw
it's
something out?
It would be opening up a new topic.
I
I've
wonder.
got so much more, Phil.
I know you always do. You're very. You're good. So no, we'll come back.
Sometimes
I've got
I
it
feel
down
like-
as basically religious exceptions and special treatment.
Privileged status of religion.
Privileged status. Okay.
Audience
Um,
participation is about 30
Kelly, so I got two questions
30
here.
minutes.
Kelly, do you see the reverse side of that? Do you perceive the reverse side of that at all? That there's privileged and special treatment of atheism? Do you see that as a problem?
can
Well,
answer that for Kelly.
I'm not sure about atheism or not. I don't think you guys are a big enough group yet to have that really demonstrated, because it's like 10% of the population or something. So,
Well, some
I mean, you
people
guys would
say
know
it's
more
higher,
about that
but
than me. I can.
I just want to offer you
Sure,
offer you
yeah,
the opportunity to
sure.
throw out. If you have a concern that you think
There certainly has been, and
Go
if
for
you
it.
happen to live in, I'm going to pick on Iran. If you happen to live in Iran, then you would have some serious persecution. But being that this country was founded on Christian
It's not
principles,
persecution.
I don't
It's-
believe that this is a
does-
Christian country, because I don't think a country can be
Thank
Christian.
you for clarifying.
But it was founded on Christian principles by people that
Arguably.
at least were deists. And I think that's the reason why we have the freedom we have here, to be able to exchange. Because in a lot of places, we wouldn't have this freedom.
No, the question.
And my pastor talks about that each Sunday.
The question
Well, the fact
is,
that you can
is
have
it,
it.
are there privileges that are based on disbelief in gods that are of concern to a believer that should be dealt with
Does it cause you consternation that
as on this top 10 type of thing?
Well, I'm an advocate of any legal avoidance of taxes. I'm advocate of that. But
Okay, and that's
that's on tape?
I said legal avoidance of taxes.
so I'm going to call
One of
that
my least
I'm gonna
favorite
call that
verses
a
in the
no,
Bible
because
is where-
that's basically a political thing.
One of my least
So,
favorite verses in the Bible is where Jesus says,
pay your
"Render
taxes.
unto Rome,
Caesar
what's
Caesar.
to Caesar." Yeah, it's one of my least favorite verses. Unfortunately, did say it.
So the
We're
other
gonna have to have a discussion when I get home about
The
that.
other
but-
thing that comes to mind here
Have to follow
is internal legal systems that are based on a religion, and I wonder if that would be sort of a broader extension of what you said when you've talked. You think about Sharia would be the top
Sure.
of that list. The
Oh,
Catholic Church is another example when they've had the pedophile scandal, and they have. Basically, you would think in any other environment, all of this would have been dealt with on a police level.
Most of the European problems were based on that. Yeah.
Is that part of this? I don't know if there's other examples. There are FLDS, for example, the Fundamental Latter-day Saints. Some degree, the Mormons. Is that something we should add to this list or make it a separate
I
item?
think it's a good subcategory of religious privilege. I mean, if
Okay.
they get to set and codify the rules themselves, of course they're going to
Yeah.
privilege themselves every time.
Sure.
Okay, so we'll leave that. So who have I not gotten to a second time
I
yet?
don't think David's been able to ask a question yet.
I've said a lot of things, but I'll say
Ask a
more.
question, though.
Ask a question.
Well, no,
Oh.
I've got 8 so far.
Okay.
Misogyny we haven't talked about. Did you bring that up or?
No, I think
I
I think that was Eric.
Yeah.
Okay, well let's
Sounds
go.
like an
Let's
Eric
go ahead
one.
and you give us one to for the list and.
Okay, well, this is like something that I think is, I don't know how priority this is, but I'm doing a broader category of pop anti-science and alternative medicine, which covers things like homeopathy, chiropractic, acupuncture, and I would even, the reason why I'm including not just alternative medicine, but also anti-scientific beliefs, we already talked about vaccines, right?
Mhm.
But one of the things I'm concerned about is things like people freaking out about GMOs, or people.
Everything is a GMO, by the way.
Well, yeah, we're not going to disagree on that, but I'm just saying people freaking out about GMOs, people opposing the fluoridation of water because they're concerned that it's going to do some damage. This is, I mean, I'm throwing all this in the broad, like it's a miscellaneous kind of a
Science denial.
science denial. It's something that's important because this is something, because as someone who works with a lot of, I guess, left-leaning people, this is something I encounter a lot. Is they're like, wait, you don't want to ban GMOs? Like, no, I don't. And and this is why. And you know, it's this. And so it's not something I'm limiting to just one political side. It happens all across the political spectrum. And it's funny that this is something where someone who's more right politically could make a legitimate point. Like some people on the left are not as pro science as they let on, and when you're holding on to these non-scientific, when you're like talking about the mysticism of acupuncture, you're not being very scientific.
Everybody's subject to woo and
Yeah.
logical fallacy.
And so what I'm trying to get at is just we should have a science-based. I believe that science is valuable because it can be demonstrated, and wherever possible, we should. You know, like definitely, like, I mean, I'll give you an example. This is kind of like a nitpick, but I mean, it does bother me that I go inside of Walgreens and the homeopathic medicine is right up there next to the real
It's
medicine.
an oxymoron, homeopathic medicine.
And no, I know that, and it's just like, I feel like we should like have a huge big red sticker on it saying this is just water. You know, it's like, you know,
So a couple comments on
go
that.
ahead.
One is, you know, I agree that you know, the presence of medicine that has not been shown to work nearly as well as you know, medicine that comes about by the scientific method and goes through thorough testing and trials and whatnot. You know, it's not simply a problem for the United States, but the question of how we should control that. You know, homeopathic medicines are not cleared by the FDA. They do state that on the label, but unfortunately, we're not going to get around that problem by doing as much legal proceedings against that as we are addressing the supply side of things. Right? In other words, why is there still a demand for these things? Right, and sorry, not the supply side, the demand side of things. Why is there still a demand for these things? You know, and tying into the broader context, which I brought up as my first issue, is, you know, why is there such a vehement opposition to something on which we have scientific consensus? You know, specifically when it comes to healthcare. You know, and that could even be made into a broader subject of, you know, are experts and to what extent do expert opinions and evidence inform the public choices, you know, and how is it okay that, you know, we have these groups that are on the same footing politically as groups that have a lot more evidence to them?
Yeah, we've got some quote unquote experts. You know, you see them on afternoon television,
Right.
for example, who claim to be experts who really are not.
Right.
There's a lot more commercialism than expertise.
Can I just to hopefully dovetail and add something to the conversation on just general science denial? Pick your science denial. flat earthers, homeopathy, no offense, young earth creationists. Pick your science denial. Pick your science denial. I think the reason and the bedrock of what you're driving at, Havish, is because when you talk to a pick your science denier, they're not actually talking about that science. They're not talking about evolution. They're not talking about vaccines. They're not talking about climate change. They're talking about eternal life, because to them, that's what the stakes are about. If they admit the objective, accurate scientific facts of climate change or vaccines or biological evolution through natural selection, to them, they're giving up on eternal life. They're admitting that it's gone. And people are so emotionally attached. I can see I'm reaching for it. People are so emotionally attached to the accuracy of these ideas. They're willing to deny the very facts of nature that are observable and obvious to all of us.
Right, and I think it also gets informed by our nature to oppose something that we've seen, at least, or that we've interpreted as being accurate. For instance, a lot of homeopathy.
I'm sorry, we being who?
So the group that. Let me just give you an example that might clarify things a little bit. For those who advocate for homeopathic medicines, for instance, they're so convinced that they work because they work for them, work for their sister and their mom and whoever else. Therefore it must work for everybody.
Or they think they work.
Sorry?
Or they perceive
right.
They
They see the outcome and they're not as interested in why the outcome is not as relevant as the methodology here and what's at stake here. It's. I agree with what you're saying, Eric, as far as the motivations for doing that. But I don't think eternal life is the only concern that people have. When they oppose these things, it's much more practical concerns as well. Because if I'm going to go oppose something that I've been advocating for, such as say homeopathic medicine or GMOs and banning GMOs, whatnot, I've just I'm admitting to some form of being incorrect publicly, and that's something that we're reluctant to do, but I think there is I'm saying that there's a much higher correlation among people who are trained in the scientific method who admit to being wrong than people who are not trained, because that is one of the cornerstones of the scientific method, is when the evidence suggests that you should change your worldview and your model. It is imperative that we do that.
Kelly, you get a free dagger.
Okay, so we covered a few different things there, Eric, throughout the young earth thing, like he's prone to do. That's okay. Like I said, we have discussions about it all the time. Evolution, all the rest. As far as the evolution thing goes, you can find many Christians who believe in it. And I do, to a certain extent. You guys know what the difference is.
You believe in microevolution, not macroevolution.
I believe that inside the species, there's adaptation that happens. Everybody can see that.
Yeah.
So I don't have any problem with that. The definition of that word is where we'll have struggles. And we've talked about it before. I don't think that's really what we want to go into right now. Can if you want, but you got another half an hour,
I hope
45
that's a separate
minutes.
topic.
It's not the
because
focus.
That's not the focus.
I was grouping in all science
Okay.
denial. I know you disagree that evolution and young earthers belong in the science denial camp, but I was grouping them in as a set. To be fair.
Havish, as far as the admission of error, I find that to be human. Admission of error. I've got a video on my website of Richard Dawkins, and I don't particularly like him, but I put him on there, and he's going on and on about a particular scientific theory that he's dictating is proven, and he goes on to quote Steven Weinberg as someone who would back him up on the idea. The video goes through, sits him down with Steven Weinberg, and Steven Weinberg says, that's complete speculation on M theory, complete speculation. And did Dawkins go up and say, I was wrong. I'm taking out an individual just to point this out.
Steven Weinberg.
Did he come up? Steven Weinberg's a cosmologist and smart guy. He's in the field.
Yeah.
So the ideas are different in that play, but Dawkins gets back up in front of the microphone and says, well, it may not be proven, but I like it because it's elegant. Elegant is an emotional response, and you can bring up people that have a belief in God and have the same thing, but you're characterization of the people in the science realm, I don't find that to be true.
I didn't
'Cause
say
find
that,
they can,
being a scientist or being trained in the scientific method makes you immune to admitting you're
I think
wrong.
they can have cognitive dissonance as well.
Absolutely, because cognitive dissonance is not something and when we say cognitive dissonance, what we mean is, your belief or worldview about one particular issue might be in one way, but you when it comes to a different issue, you're kind of taking the opposite view. It's a mild form of hypocrisy, one not necessarily, but hypocrisy is kind of a harsh word because it implies that the person is doing this willingly.
Sure, I think a lot of them are honest in their belief system.
But
sure, and they're
first off, I don't think that using one example. I admit I'm not familiar with that particular example.
I could give others, but
but
all I'm saying is that
there are certainly people across the spectrum, scientists, non-scientists, everybody, who can be hesitant to admit that they're wrong. But I think you will find a correlation meaning they're more likely statistically to admit that they are wrong or to know when they don't know, if they're trained in the scientific method, and as opposed to people who are not. And I'm not saying simply laymen versus professionals. I'm saying in general, it may be a personality thing. I don't know. It's probably part of it. But, I think science tends to correct for that. And without getting, too much off topic there, that kind of brings it up to this has real consequences for the public at large, because it's not simply a question of who's right. It's a question of we need to act here based on the best evidence that we have. And of course, when money's involved, such as the rival industries that create a lot of kind of false demand for therapies and whatnot that people buy into. I mean, it's multi-million-dollar industries, these alternative medicines and naturopathic remedies and whatnot. Some of them might work, but again, the hallmark of that is they're not so much concerned about the methodology. Is it works for some people, therefore it must be good enough. So go buy it if all else fails. So it's we're not talking about abstract issues here. We're talking about money. We're talking about actual physical forces that we are dealing with in the day-to-day life.
Kelly, I'm gonna come back to you for another
question.
Another one for the list.
Two in the same
What do you
deal.
got?
Okay. Let me see here. What another one's on here? Okay, let's take a real hot button
Because
issue.
all the things that we've done are frivolous, right?
No, if they're not frivolous, we're
I
doing
did kind
what
of
we're
imply
supposed
that,
to
didn't
do.
I? Sorry about that, guys. Imposition of LGBT tolerance, as
Okay.
as Phil had on here. Just throw that as a general question. What do you guys think? And what do you think, based on your worldview, how that's framed?
No, I mean this is for you
Yeah.
to define the problem. So that's what
Okay.
I'm asking you. How do you perceive this as a problem, and what is the problem? What's the position?
Okay, so
from your perspective.
From my perspective, I feel like oh boy, how do I put this? The mindset of the Christian is that they're against it for what Eric was talking about because of our eternal life framework. I personally believe that Jesus gave us a choice, and that choice is up to us to make. And I'll be straight honest with you guys. I voted against, or whichever version of it was.
You voted yes on Prop 8.
Yeah, and I rescind that. I should have voted the other way because Jesus does give us the choice to make. He'll explain to you how the choice is and how that's going to benefit you or not. But he gave you the right to make the choice. And if I had a chance to re-vote on that, I would vote the other way. So on that perspective, I believe that maybe some of the mindset in the Christian community is that it's we don't like it because we don't like those people. And I don't. That's not me. But I think a lot of that mindset's out there, and it could be right in some instances that there's this idea that in that particular I don't know, better word, sin, that particular one is worse than any other one. It's not. It's no worse than than adultery. It's no worse than any other type of use of the design than what God intended it to. But as far as governments dictating that position, I don't foresee the government dictating that position. I don't think they can. Plus, I wouldn't want them to. I voted for that once, and I wouldn't vote for it again. So I'm open to people making that choice. I would explain to them that there's some ramifications to it, but we're all free moral agents. We get to make the choices we want.
Did some comments, David?
Oh, no. Oh, well, you know, I mean, I'm not trying to brag here, but I'm involved with several LGBT groups, including 2 different transgender organizations. And, you know, I think we don't generally like to be, like, you know, challenged on our right to exist. I think a lot of people, the reason why you don't see a lot of LGBT people coming onto panels like this is because we don't want to debate our own existence. We don't debate, like, are we valid? Like, are we right? Like, to us, it's just, that's who we are. And it's like, it's the question itself is almost just absurd. Like, nobody questions anyone else's right to be who they are. Like, it's only the, like, LGBT or, like, people, I'm not saying it's only that, but you know what I'm saying. It seems like LGBT people are targeted in a way that other people are not. And I think to speak good of Christians, because I work with a lot of Christian churches, and there are a lot of LGBT friendly denominations. There's some people who do really good work, and I think that is an essential thing for you know, as we've seen religion adapt through history. So I do think that's a positive development, because if we're going to have religion, I mean, religion's going to be around, I think, forever. And if it's going to be around, I prefer it to be one that's more inclusive and more accepting. And then we can coexist, and, you know, we don't have to all agree on everything, but we can at least not be denying people their, right.
You said adapt. I don't.
Oh, well, the Christianity of the, like, I guess, I mean, a very, you know, I mean, like, the Christianity of the 1800s is different than what's today. I mean,
well, you can pick out a denomination and have a particular viewpoint that you want, but if you go, and I don't go by what some denomination might say. As I said, I like to think of myself as a Berean. I want to go by what the Bible says, and Christ preached that your choice is your choice, and then you get to make it.
Then that opens up another problem with, like, which Bible. You know, I mean, it's kind of
that particular topic's the same.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move on, because we'll put it down as an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think I've hit everybody twice, so I'm going to ask everybody to have a look at your list and see if there's one item on there that you think we've missed that needs to be added to this list.
Well, I do have one item, but it might not just apply to. Well, it doesn't just apply to religious viewpoints versus non-religious viewpoints. So I don't really want to bring that in. Again, I had thought that maybe we might have tangents into that cross, religious versus non-religious, and have belief versus.
Well, it can be belief. Yeah. I mean, the pop science thing, that's an example of belief. I mean, it's people know my believe-ins comment when
right.
Concept,
well,
so
in that along those lines, the question that I had in addition to these is, to what extent is substance abuse an individual's choice and responsibility, and how should we address that? And I don't mean to speak for one group or the other necessarily, but you do see a lot of groups that adhere to religions, and I'm not saying all religious people act this way. I'm just saying, generally speaking, there's not a lot of organized religion that will that will recognize that it's more than just a matter of sin versus, being free of sin. It's not so much as clear cut as that, and it's not necessarily an individual's responsibility. So I don't see a lot of religious groups advocating for that, whereas much more of the medical community and the psychologist community recognizes that there is an aspect of dependence that transcends individual responsibility. It's not simply up to the individual to recognize that they're sinning and therefore they should get out of it. It's more of an illness. It has a component of illness that needs to be reconciled with.
Just a question. Would you include? It's going to pick a particular one that I was involved in. Alcoholism.
Absolutely. I mean, substance abuse. It could be any number of substances.
But Habish, don't you think that's a bit of a choice? I mean, they sell alcohol in the corner. Are you saying they sell disease at the corner?
I'm not saying that choosing the partaking of alcoholic beverages is not a choice. It is. Okay, it is as much a choice as picking a restaurant or engaging in a behavior that's societally acceptable in certain ways and not so acceptable in other ways. But I'm saying the dependence on alcohol, because you chose that example, and how that then leads to other negative consequences for the individual, for his or her family, whatnot. How much of that is the individual's responsibility, and how much of that, and what specifically does the religious worldview have to say about that, as opposed to the addiction, the nature of addiction being more akin to mental illness?
Well, there's the, not that I promote this organization, but there's AA, which started out as a Christian organization, and their plan going forward was try to get people away from it.
Right,
through therapy and trying to get them to realize that's not a good life choice.
Once again,
in particular, though, you're right. There's some that are more. I don't know what the good word is for susceptible, maybe, but there's maybe some people that are more susceptible to having that control their life than others. But it's still a choice.
Right.
And that's the same, I think, with any drug you want to try to start abusing. It is and maybe prescription is the exception, but it is your choice to do that. And are we supposed to help them? Absolutely. We have programs at our church for addiction, and they try to help people through it, get them to realize it's a bad choice for you to make in your life because it's not going to help you. It's going to hurt you in the long run in just about every other relationship you want that you're going to be involved with, be it work or marriage or your kids, people around you. It's going to be a bad choice for you in any of those circumstances. But maybe I'm getting it wrong.
Well, let's leave it at that.
Correct me if I am. But was the inference that the religious community was less likely to address that issue than the non? Maybe I'm getting you wrong, so correct me.
No, I'm not saying that. We have seen several religious groups address that issue, and one of my issues, it's not high on my list necessarily, but one of the issues is the fact that Alcoholics Anonymous, for instance, requires or strongly encourages its members to pick up spirituality as a method for getting themselves out of substance abuse.
A higher power.
Specifically, right, a higher power. I mean, it's couched in friendly terms, but we all know what.
But that higher power can be your friend that's sitting next to you.
Right,
from what I gather, I haven't been through it, but what's what I gather. They can be your friend sitting next to you.
It's once again, I don't see it absorbing a lot of the recommendations that mental health professionals have made as far as paths to recovery. But again, I'm not necessarily bringing that issue up to discuss it right now.
Okay, guys,
but it's just a broader issue.
Yeah, let's drop that. Let's leave that. Let's put that down. I mean, I just came up with a lot right here. I mean, there's libertarianism, and there's pot legalization, there's the morality of the issues, there's sinning versus disease, there's the recovery. There's a lot in there, so that's a good one. We got to hurry up a little bit. Eric, if you got anything else?
Yeah, I forgive me. I didn't get a chance to drop my bombs on the LGBT conversation, so I'm gonna do that real quick. I'll try to do it quick.
No.
You gotta give me a chance.
We will do that as a panel. We will do that as a panel. New issues.
Did it already.
Any new issues that we didn't?
Yeah. So what I call corporal capital punishment, abuse in the name of faith. If you'll bear with me and follow me down the rabbit hole on these definitions, you don't have to agree, just follow my reasoning along. If terrorism is using fear to accomplish an agenda, and you tell a child, go clean your room or I'm going to beat you with a rod, you are using fear to accomplish an agenda. You are terrorizing that child. If you tell a child, if you don't believe in Jesus or you're going to burn in hell for eternity, you are using fear to motivate that child. You are terrorizing that child. I consider that. I take umbrage with that specific mentality, that specific. So I call it corporal capital punishment or abuse in the name of faith. There's a whole lot of other subsets too, like polygamy, people are coerced into that. All the whole misogyny topic goes underneath that as well. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And I don't want to take too much of Phil's time, sorry.
Would you feel the same way about telling a kid not to walk off the side of a cliff?
If it's going to cause him harm, unnecessary illness.
My point is this: you're looking at it in a materialistic viewpoint, and I understand that. That's fine. But what if it's true? And I'm not saying that that's my approach to my kids and my grandkids, because it's not. But if that is true, then are you doing harm? I'm not really thrilled with that characterization or that
didn't
that avenue.
I didn't expect you to.
Okay, but if it's true, then it's something as at least as important to tell them not to cross the street in traffic.
Well, as soon as we have a reason or objective, credible evidence to think it's what you're calling true, that's
we
one
could
thing.
go into that.
The problem
We're not
is,
going to
I know.
today, are we?
The problem is, okay, everybody says their specific metaphysical claim is true, and you all bring the same amount of credible evidence. So how are we supposed to tell?
There would have to be some
so
evidence.
if it's not true, if it's not what you're calling true, true has a whole epistemological problem as well.
We would have to
if
have
it's,
that
If it's
debate.
not factual, then you recognize that is terrorism the same way you recognize the children in the madrasas in Pakistan banging their head against a wall or flagellating themselves. You recognize that's terrorism. You recognize that's child abuse, manipulating a child with fear, right? Because their beliefs are untrue. You just make an exception for your own religious beliefs, right?
You're also talking about physical injury, too.
Well, it may not have to do with physical injury. I mean, it's
emotional abuse is equal.
A less harmful example would be, what if your child doesn't pray 5 times a day on Fridays, or on every day, and then go to mosque or whatever place of worship on Fridays? Is that people who follow that also come out with kind of the same response as, well, we do this first because this is the way we've always done it, and even if that's not the case, then we don't want to incur the negative consequences of not doing that.
Well, I think you're venturing into legalism there. It's kind of a theological idea, but that I think you're venturing into legalism there, because I don't. That isn't something that is anywhere you can find in the Bible that dictates that. But let me just finish my point real quick. All those things that you mentioned, I would tell my kids and my grandkids, I do tell them that Jesus loves you unconditionally. I don't say anything about them going to the other place, because I plan on them not, by the grace of God. But is that something that I believe? Yeah, I do, because it's repeated over and over again, and I do believe in extra-dimensional space, because I think it's obvious that we have it.
Okay.
So anyway, that's a different debate on something else.
We're out of time here, but I'm going to quickly, is there anything else that we missed that you guys would add? Any topics?
I think we should get a chance for these nice people
and
that are
then
listening
that's
to
what we're going to
get
do
a question
next.
and answer.
Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next thing. What we're going to do here is we're going to take our break for the Q&A. Actually, I'm going to offer it up to the audience to add subjects to, and then we're going to come back and then dwindle down that list to basically the top. We're going to try to prioritize the list, but I want to get some input from the audience to be able to add to the list also. So we have our grand total. We don't have 10, we have 8 subjects in order. We voted between the panel and the room, basically everybody in the room, so as to which things were most important to talk about. So we're going to pull up some of these over time in believers and non-believers, but this is a recommendation for society in general. So please have these discussions amongst yourselves. Post them on YouTube if you can. Write to us, give us suggestions on specifics. Some of these topics get pretty big and will need to be narrowed down. So number 8, we have 8, is the use of violence in religious conflict. Number 7 is religious freedom legislation. Number 6 is belief bubbles, subtopic of tribalism. Number 5 is epistemology and standardization of epistemology, so people can understand what they're talking about. So people talk about the same thing. Number 4, discrimination. This goes in every direction now, of the by the non-religious toward the religious, by the religious toward the non-religious, and between religions. So discrimination in all those directions. Number 3 is abortion. That's going to be an emotional one. Number 2, we didn't really define too much this time, but it was voted on, so we'll define this and do it down the road. The topic of misogyny. And number 1, science denial and disagreement of what is correct and true in science and how that should be dealt with as a society. So thank you for watching this one. We'll be on YouTube. Take a look at the Facebook page, Believers and Non-Believers in Discussion, and we'll see you at a future episode. Thank you everybody for coming.